Welcome to Global Civics Academy and the online course on Global Civics. My name is Hakan Altinay and I'll be with you throughout the course. This is a course that will last 14 weeks or one semester. It is designed as an advanced undergraduate course in one of the leading universities in the world. You will have lectures by 12 scholars. They come from the best universities and institutions around the world and represent a dozen different nationalities. Each week you will have reading, writing, research, and watching assignments. You should plan 3 to 5 hours of work each week or 60 hours of work for the whole semester. Now you can do this work in as little time as 1 month or as long as a year. You can take the course for credit or you can audit the course. If you audit the course, you will have access to the lectures and can watch them. You will also have access to the reading and writing assignments, but you will not need to turn them in. If you are taking the course for credit, you first need to write to the registrar and register for the course by completing a short form. Those students who are taking the course for credit will have access to the lectures and can watch them. They will also have reading and writing assignments, which they will need to turn in, as well as a final paper. If and when you complete the course successfully, you will receive credit with the Global Civics Academy. At no time you will be asked to pay a fee. Global Civics Academy is a not-for-profit institution that has been made possible by grants from foundations including Stiftung Mercator in Germany, as well as donations and in-kind contributions by individuals from around the world who believe in the necessity of this global pursuit. If you want to have your credit with Global Civics Academy recognized at other institutions, the registrar will provide you with the documentation you need. Every year, a small group of successful students will be invited to join Global Civics Academy as fellows. Fellows will be able to join existing projects or will be able to start a project of their own. They will receive some modest funding. Now let's start exploring the idea of global civics. Global civics is predicated on a number of key observations and hypotheses, and it may help us to start reviewing them at this early stage. First, we live in a world of increasing global interdependence. Manifestations of that interdependence are everywhere. Carbon dioxide emissions from China affect temperature and precipitation all around the world. That in turn affects agriculture in Bangladesh and beyond. Financial engineering in the United States, or the manner in which public debt is calculated or miscalculated in Greece, have dramatic repercussions for employment and growth all around the world. A pandemic emerging from Vietnam or a nuclear leak from Japan have consequences for public health halfway around the world. This is a significant development and it is likely to accelerate. During the last 200 years, we have gained greater control of our destinies. This was made possible through technology and democracy. We all essentially assume that we are the masters of our destiny and that we author the storyboard of our lives. Yet if our interdependence is going to continue and even accelerate, this means that our lives will be co-authored by others whom we don't know and may not even like. The overarching theme of this course is to analyze the nature, the texture of this interdependence, and to conceive of ways to deal with this predicament. I should add that there is a generational dimension to this phenomenon. For the first time in human history, we may be living in a world where a 20-year-old has significant shared interests with other 20-year-olds halfway around the world. Meanwhile, our world has been organized on the assumption that 20-year-olds share interests with 70-year-olds in their own nation state and not with other 20-year-olds halfway around the world. Throughout the course, we will examine what are the centripetal forces pushing us together. We will try to find answers to what interests we share and what is the rapport we wish to have with people with whom we share our planet, but not our country. The second hypothesis is that generic global governance is not sufficient. The world cooperates around a very long and impressive list of issues. We have systems to coordinate money being wired across borders. Mobile phones work in other countries. Thousands of international flights take place across crowded skies. Satellites are launched into orbits which won't crash. Seeds are stored in global crop diversity walks to spread risk. Underground waters are shared across borders. Most of this happens without much attention from us, and we take them for granted. This impressive level of coordination and cooperation has emerged because they made sense and because they involved little or no cost. Yet the next round of challenges we face will require significant costs in terms of money and sovereignty. Therefore, finding solutions to those challenges will not be a technocratic puzzle to be cracked, but they will require some kind of a social contract, some understanding of our common bonds, and the level of solidarity we wish to practice. Those questions in turn depend on our diagnosis regarding our interdependence. Are we really in this together? Different dynamics, say climate change versus global public health, have different consequences and different methodologies to deal with those cross-border consequences. As you will see in the next few weeks, we will study each major dynamic and try to ascertain precisely how they push us together. Piece by piece, we will each try to come up with our versions of a global civics that we can subscribe to and a global civics that can provide sufficient guidance and guarantees as we navigate our new global interdependence. The third point is that global civics is not only necessary, but it is also feasible. The dominant narratives about international affairs tend to underestimate the role of ideas and norms. They insist that all power is hard power and that being loved or respected is no substitute for being feared. The great power game of nations always continues, we are told, even when a higher goal or rhetoric is evoked. Superpowers are selfish, arbitrary, and dangerous nations, and they should not be embarrassed to be so and not feel constrained by international legitimacy and laws. Cynics prefer to be unconcerned about challenges such as climate change or the achievements of transnational normative action such as abolishing the slave trade or establishing the International Criminal Court. This course is predicated on the notion that while power relations and interests exist and are important, they are not the only variable that we should be concerned about. One of the analogies that has been used to explain global civics is the way we drive. Each day, many of us drive at speeds above 50 miles an hour in a ton of metal, extremely close to others who are doing the same thing. A slight move of the steering wheel in the wrong direction would wreak havoc, but we cruise carefree because we drive in an implicit fellowship with other drivers and have reasonable expectations about their behavior. Such fellowship with and expectations of other drivers serve to mitigate the theoretical risk of driving, and they exist because people follow a long-established framework of laws, habits, and conventions about how to operate automobiles. If we could not count on other drivers and the pattern of the roads, we would drive far more cautiously. Global civics is the corresponding mental map and compass we need in navigating, not in traffic, but in an increasingly interdependent world. Surveys show that working towards a global civics is not a naive undertaking. For example, the World Public Opinion Survey has asked people around the world whether we should obey international law as we obey national law, or whether we can forego obeying international law when our government considers it not to be in our national interest. When a sample representing 90% of the people in the world surveyed found that 58% of the people wanted to obey international law even when their government said doing so would not be in the national interest. This is a remarkably high percentage, yet when that 58% were asked whether the rest of their society agree with them or whether they were part of a minority, they reported their multilateralist views to be the minority opinion in their society. Through more systematic engagement with each other and through efforts such as the Global Civics Academy, we are likely to discover that not only are we not alone in our own societies, but also we represent majorities in the world. The fourth and related point I would put forward is that civics is not just about institutions. It is also very much about norms and conventions. You may have taken a course on civics when you were at high school, and I suspect you reviewed various institutions, organs of the state, things like that. You may have had a brief discussion about your rights and responsibilities emanating from your citizenship. In our standard discussions on civics, We have become too concerned about institutions, and we have neglected the norms and the conventions which enable those very institutions. Fortunately, there is a new cluster of studies on the evolution of norms and cooperation, and I believe they provide us with new insights into why and how we cooperate. I would argue that without that understanding of cooperation and norms, the review of public institutions rings hollow. Let me start with an example to illustrate what I'm talking about, the Ultimatum Game. This is an experiment which has been repeated in many parts of the world in the last 30 years, where two people are given $100, and the first person decides how to split the money. The second person has no say in what the split should be, hence the ultimatum. The second person can either accept the split and they each get their proposed share, or he or she can reject the split, in which case they both receive nothing. If one has a dim view of humanity, one may be surprised to learn that the average split is 60-40. Furthermore, we see that offers worse than 80-20 are routinely rejected by those in the second position, which is interesting and begs an explanation. Why didn't those people in the second position accept even $1, as that is better than nothing? It turns out that ours is a species which is willing to pay a price to uphold fairness and the generic ethics of reciprocity. I should add that over-generosity is also frequently rejected. That is, when the first person keeps $40 and gives $60 to the second person. The second person in many cases rejects the offer, as she or he does not want to be indebted even implicitly. These features of our common humanity may not find adequate place in our own narratives or popular culture, but they may nevertheless be indispensable to running our societies. If these are the types of questions one has, there is actually a good deal to help guide us in the social sciences. Adam Smith, Max Weber, John Elster, Robert Putnam, Williamson, Fukuyama, and others have argued for a long time that enforceable contracts alone do not give us what we need to survive and prosper. Norms, social capital, trust, predictability, and all kinds of other less than immediately tangible phenomena are also needed. Fukuyama demonstrated convincingly that a shared set of norms provides predictability and decrease the cost of doing business, or even being a community. If anything is possible, even a simple transaction will require all kinds of eventualities and contingencies to be planned and prepared for. If violators and free riders are numerous, law enforcement functions would demand prohibitively high resources. Since even the most comprehensive legal document cannot cover all eventualities, some transactions simply do not take place in low predictability, low trust settings, depressing welfare prospects. If on the other hand, one can operate in a high trust, high predictability environment, transaction costs are lowered and welfare potential is maximized. Cristina Biccieri describes norms as the grammar of a society. Like grammar in a language, they are often implicit as they are formative. Norms are dynamic and are sustained and reproduced by people who act as conditional cooperators. People uphold norms and cooperate when they expect others to cooperate, and defect when they observe majorities defecting. Elsewhere, Robert Axelrod had explored how cooperation emerges in a world of egoists and without central authority, and he discovered that starting out with cooperation and then reciprocating both cooperation and defection has proved to be an exceptionally resilient and successful strategy in several simulated experiments. Others, such as Edward Wilson and Brian Skirms, have set out to discover the evolutionary advantages that the golden rule of doing unto others what you wish them do unto you and the Kantian categorical imperative unleashed in favor of prosocial behavior. Bowles and Gintes argue that our linguistic skills are key to our ability to formulate general norms, to erect social institutions, to communicate rules and what they entail, and to alert others to their violations, and to organize coalitions to punish the violators. Biccieri, too, underscores the multiple ways in which communication elicits and elucidates norms. We learn and produce norms by
talking and debating them. And that is the sense of civics that we will be referring to when we talk about global civics in this course. It may be clear by now, but let's be explicit. Global civics is not global ethics. It is also not global citizenship. It is not global ethics because what we are exploring are not some timeless rules on how we should live. Global civics that we will forge will inevitably be related to contingent factors. If we didn't face a challenge like climate change, the global civics we end up deciding we need may be significantly different. Global civics does have a normative component, but it is also part and parcel of our enlightened self-interest. This is why we will keep on asking what is in our interest and not just what the right thing to do is. What we will explore is also not global citizenship, as citizenship connotes membership in a legal national system to many people. Precisely because some people view global citizenship as an alternative to their national citizenship, they resist or oppose the idea. They do not want to exchange what they know as a time-tested constellation of rights and responsibilities for a fuzzy notion based on a vague community. Our survey of global civics is not predicated on people giving up their national citizenship, nor is it built on any expectation that we should somehow care as much about people halfway around the world as we do about our family and friends. Global civics recognizes that our primary concern is and will be our friends and family, and it then proceeds to explore what sort of a rapport we need to have with billions of others who are not our compatriots so that we can enjoy the good life we choose with our friends and family. I hope these 5 points give you some bearings as we set out in our journey. We'll keep on returning to many of these themes throughout the course. Now let's review the weeks ahead. Next week, we'll think about how our global awareness has evolved and what role different types of media has played in that evolution. Ethan Zuckerman of Massachusetts Institute of Technology will be our lecturer that week. It's a fascinating theme, and Zuckerman is a superb lecturer. In week 3, we will explore how international trade has bound the world together in history and more recently. We will explore the systems we have had to manage international trade and its consequences. We will do this with Mohammed Rezan Saleh of the National University of Singapore. The following week, we will review one of the most dramatic dynamics, climate change. Our lecturer will be Hans Schellnhuber from the Potsdam Institute. We will not only try to understand climate change, but we will also try to develop the broad parameters of a solution. On week 5, global economy and the 2008 crisis will be our theme. Our lecturer will be Amar Bhattacharya. Among others, we'll start considering the data about possible convergence in the world. We will see whether the difference between the affluent West and the rest of the world is indeed narrowing. On week 6, we will review pandemics and how humanity has dealt with them throughout history, and how our defenses look in the 21st century. Our lecturer will be Mark Harrison from the University of Oxford. The following week, nuclear weapons and the threats they pose and the way we have tried to manage and decrease that threat will be our subject. We will do that discussion with Professor Dingli Shan from Fudan University in China. I should mention here that Professor Shan is a member of the board of the Global Civics Academy. As a part of our survey, one of the related arguments we will consider is whether our world is getting more or less peaceful, more or less violent. On week 8, we'll take a step back and consider whether humanity has the conceptual, cultural tools, the meta-language, to deal with the interdependence we have. The issues we have discussed the previous weeks, climate change, trade, pandemics, nuclear arms, global economy, present us with new and challenging dilemmas. And on week 8, we will discuss whether the collective cultural know-how of the world can help us overcome this formidable challenge. Our lecturer will be Thaddeus Metz from University of Johannesburg. The following week, we will ask the same question, this time in terms of our technocratic know-how. We will review with Javier Solana issues such as global governance and global public goods. In weeks 10 and 11, we'll look into inequality and poverty. Is the world getting more or less unequal? Is there more or less poverty in the world today than 50 or 100 years ago? What can we do? What should we do? What about things like inequality and poverty? The outstanding lectures we have for weeks 10 and 11 are Branko Milanovic of the World Bank and Dani Rodrik of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton. During weeks 12 and 13, we will consider mass atrocities, genocides, and what responsibilities we have and what tools we have. We will consider the evolution and the current state of the responsibility to protect and the International Criminal Court. We have two very well-placed lecturers. Gareth Evans has been involved with the new norm of responsibility to protect from the very beginning, and he is now the Chancellor of the Australian National University. He'll be our lecturer for week 12. The first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo, now a professor at New York University, will be our lecturer for week 13. He will walk us through the quest for global justice. Week 14 is when we take stock and consider the challenges and prospects of a global civics. That's also when you learn the topic of your final paper.
You may be feeling a little overwhelmed, considering the fate of billions of others, the state of the world, the precarious and evolving nature of our interdependence is no small task. I can assure you that by the end of the course, all this will feel more natural and the world will make more sense. Let me leave you on an upbeat note. You are the luckiest generation in human history because you lead longer, healthier, more peaceful and more capable lives than any other time in human history. Consider the 7 billionth person. UN designated a baby girl born in Manila a couple of years ago as the 7 billionth human being. It was an arbitrary choice. Basically, anyone born on that day could have been the 7 billionth person. But that arbitrary point in the flow of history gives us an opportunity to draw up a balance sheet for where humanity is. Let's challenge ourselves and consider how we would give an orientation to that 7 billionth person about what awaits her in terms of her life on this planet. We would need to tell her about key benchmarks. We would need to tell her that she could expect to live 70 years, and that is very good news, because her grandmother a century ago could have only counted on half of that. We could tell her that the world is a very unequal place in terms of income and wealth, but in terms of life expectancy, the disparities have been decreasing fast. We could tell her in good faith that the world possesses some global public health measures and that we have managed to eradicate smallpox and may see the end of polio and malaria in her lifetime. We could tell her that she could expect to receive schooling of 11 years, which is also very good news because a century ago that number would be more like 1 year. We could tell her that the world that awaits her prizes gender equality more than any other time in human history. So she could expect a more enabling world than her mother or grandmother could count on. In terms of her access to information and knowledge, tycoons or emperors from previous centuries would be envious. Through things like Google Scholar or Wikipedia, or Khan Academy, and maybe even the Global Civics Academy, she will have access to information and knowledge that would be completely unprecedented for previous generations and for the encyclopedists, or for academies of sciences, or for even her grandmother or her mother. Before she turns 18, she and everyone else around her will have access to most of the information in the world through a device that she will be able to hold in her hand. Now, there are of course also critical risks. We would need to tell her that if she were to face a genocide, we cannot guarantee that someone will come to her rescue. And that is a shame, because we have known about the mind-numbing horrors of previous genocides and have profusely sworn not to allow this ultimate crime to reoccur. We would need to tell her that we have set into motion, first unknowingly, but in the last 20 years in full knowledge of what we were doing, a set of dynamics around climate change that may very soon prove irreversible and lead to catastrophic consequences. We now know that hydrocarbons their prices are too low. And the current prices of hydrocarbons don't capture the damage that their consumption is doing to the environment and to future generations. In effect, future generations will receive a delayed and a compounded bill of our current welfare. We have managed to solve our collective action problem around the depletion of the ozone layer, but not around climate change, at least not so far. Now, we would also need to tell her that throughout the 20th century, the superpowers have amassed fantastic nuclear arsenals, and on more than one occasion, the world was remarkably close to an accidental nuclear holocaust. We have not yet realized the 45-year-old goal of total nuclear disarmament enshrined in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but our current nuclear arsenals are a fraction of what they were during the height of the Cold War. Maybe most importantly, we would need to tell her that the world is a learning community. We have learned a great deal from each other. Consider the way we allocate political posts, for example. 300 years ago, all key political posts were inherited. Today, almost none are. Meritocracy has won over aristocracy. Until recently, historians used to describe a world divided by cultures of making and cultures of taking. Today, there are really no societies left who believe in cultures of taking. We may debate the proper levels of taxation and regulation, but there is really no example of a country that still believes in confiscation and pillage as a route to prosperity. Or take something like the inflation. Until recently, many developing countries were plagued by high or hyperinflation. World Economic Outlook database shows that for every year in 1980s and 90s, there were at least 36 countries which had high or hyperinflation. In 2010, none had such inflation. It seems like all the policymakers around the world have been convinced of the detrimental effects of high inflation. Or take something like the death penalty. For most of human history, this was the universal punishment available in all the countries. But most recently, 2/3 of the countries around the world, 140 by the last count, have given up on this crime. It seems like definitions of a good life, definitions of a better life, definitions of what is feasible and what is ideal is being studied, contested, internalized, and reproduced by billions every day. This may be the best news yet. The fact that humanity is a learning community is the best news that we can give to our 7 billionth person. And you will be a part of this pursuit, this process for the next 14 weeks. Now, each week you will have reading assignments. This week you have 2 reports on 2030, the world that awaits us on 2030. One is from Europe and the other one is from the United States. You are expected to read their executive summaries. Every so often, you will be asked to make a reading before the lecture of that week. And week 2 is one such week. So you are asked to read the first 6 pages of the introduction to the new digital age. This is a book written by 2 senior people by Google, and they will give you a sense of what we will discuss in week 2. So 2 sets of reading requirements, 2 reports about 2030 that you will read the executive summaries of for week 1, and an advanced reading for week 2, where you will read the introduction, the first pages of the introduction to the new digital age. Good luck, and see you next week.